Hey everybody, on today's Sci-Fi Pulsi, we're going to talk about the Zaibach Empire from Visions of Escaflowne. I will eventually do a reaction review of Visions of Escaflowne, but I've kind of been neglecting this series for a while, so I just wanted to throw a couple more episodes out there. And I think it is an interesting case in fiction. You don't see too many technocracies. I guess the term would be technocracies or magocracies are not super common outside of the Star Wars universe. I mean, sure, you have the Tevent or Imperium, but Escaflowne is kind of unique in the way that it utilizes magitech. But I'm rambling, so let's talk a bit about the foundation of Zaibach and how it functions as a kingdom. So we don't know much about the land of Zaibach prior to the arrival of Emperor Isaac Dornkirk. But what little we know is that it was the poorest area of Gaia. Given its location, I would assume it's very cold up there. The images we saw, it looked very barren. Emperor Dornkirk referred to it as being a land where the people were sick, starving, and dying. So we don't really know anything about what they were like beforehand. But Emperor Dornkirk arrived from Earth and immediately started to use his immense intelligence, technological know-how, and I guess scientific method. It's kind of interesting because he's Isaac Newton, so it makes sense that he'd know about technology. Things like, well, obviously, I was going to say physics, but physics, machinery, chemistry, all that kind of thing. He even refers to near the end of the series that he attempted to create gold from lead using alchemy. So it makes sense that he have all this scientific knowledge. Where he got all the magical knowledge from is another matter. My guess is he took kind of the scientific method and he applied it to the study of magic, experimentation, recording results, etc. And he just put it to more practical purposes than what a lot of previous people had done. He said, "Oh, we have this anti-gravity spells. Let's use that. Let's use this. We have drag energies, which are basically a limitless, clean, cheap fuel energy source. We'll use that stuff too." So, so Emperor Dornkirk somehow kind of took the magical and technological properties of Gaia and mixed them together, and through that he was able to build the Zaibach Empire. Now, whether or not the term empire is kind of a misnomer in fiction, because it kind of depends how you would define it. Generally speaking, empire can mean two things. One, it's where well, kind of two things that are interrelated. Generally, it refers to a country that rules over multiple other countries, or a nation that rules over several other nations. Like with the Persian Empire, it was Persia and Media, but they eventually took over Egypt, Babylon, the various Anatolian states, Afghanistan. They took over hundreds of different countries, and because of that, it's an empire is like I said, when there's kind of a multinational country that is made up of a bunch that is there's a dominant force within it, and an emperor normally will take something like the highest high king or king of kings, Shah de Shah, I think is how it's pronounced, is the term. Within Europe, the term emperor is normally used to claim the mantle of Rome. So the Pope crowned Charlemagne emperor because it was to show that he was the successor of the Western Roman Empire. In the case of Russia, the term Tsar was taken, Empire of Russia, to show a claim to equality with the Eastern Roman Empire. So, what am I trying to say here? Whether or not Zaibach became an empire because Dornkirk liked the title and wanted to show that Zaibach was better and as kind of a way to make it more powerful, or it became an empire after conquering a lot of the territories around it isn't really clear. Like I said, we aren't given very much in the way of historical in-universe background. At some point, though, Zaibach became the first and only that we know of industrialized country within Gaia. While most kingdoms have their own defense forces of Gaimeliths, they appear to be either cobbled together using kind of primitive technology or something that they found in the ruins left over by the ancient Atlanteans. In contrast, Zaibach's Gaimeliths are all new and state of the art. They have factories that build them, and they're custom designed for a specific military doctrine. They also have abilities that other ones don't have, such as flight, the quicksilver guns, and the cloaking devices, which nothing else in the show has displayed. I guess the closest would be Escaflowne, but it was built by the Expanio, who are kind of different. So no other Gaimelith in the series demonstrates anything resembling that level of sophistication. Like I said, the flight system was clearly built to be used with the floating fortress concept. So the floating fortresses are also interesting because while they look like they took old school like just castles that existed and put anti-gravity engines in them, you get to see one being built. So it looks like they literally will build a castle and then put the anti-gravity engines in and allow it to fly. And they serve as pretty good carriers because their Gaimeliths, like I said, have flight systems in them. They also have more ships than other countries. So by the time of the series, it's stated at some point that their main field army has 40,000 people in it. Whether that means 40,000 Gaimeliths, which I doubt, or 40,000 total, including probably hundreds or thousands of Gaimeliths, and the crew on floating fortresses, there's probably infantry. So I would assume their infantry just use guns or something. We don't really see much infantry in this universe. So anyways, by the time of the series, the Zaibach Empire has gotten to a point where it's basically stronger than any other nation, all the other nations in Gaia combined. In fact, the only way that the Coalition's able to beat them at the end of the series is because they build a primitive atomic and succeed in killing most of their own army, as well as Zaibach. Whether or not you want to call this a plot device and that otherwise Zaibach would have overrun them all is an interesting question, but one we can't really answer. What we do know is they were able to destroy Asturia, Freyde, and Finalia while taking minimal casualties. The amount of technological difference between these different societies was kind of like when the British arrived in Africa. The Zulus were able to mount something resembling a defense, but they were completely outclassed by hundreds, if not thousands, of years of development. So ultimately, though, the goal of Dornkirk was to not use Zaibach as a way to conquer and unify the world, which is kind of interesting because if he wanted to create a new world order, he probably could have achieved it through military means quite easily. He could have parked, kind of like what the Empire did in Star Wars, a floating fortress above every major city and maintained order that way, eventually annexing and culturally assimilating the various countries. But the goal of Zaibach, and I think this is something that a lot of the military personnel didn't really understand, was to activate the Atlantean machine and grant everybody their dreams. And I mean, at the end of the series, we don't really know what happens to Zaibach. Does it continue? Is there some successor to Dornkirk chosen? Does it just fall apart since its reason to exist doesn't exist anymore? Do the allied countries get their act together enough to partition it? We don't really know. But interestingly, Dornkirk does achieve his dream The wish granting machine does work. It's just everybody wishes for destruction and more war. So Zaibach had this benevolent dream of basically achieving a utopia for everybody, but it turned out that everybody's desires kind of corrupted it. So that's kind of interesting. Now, with regards to its internal government, we do know that Emperor Dornkirk is an autocrat, as far as we can determine. They seem to have an almost religious reverence for him, and he was the man who lifted them up out of nothing. So we don't really see much of Zaibach's civilian government throughout this series. We do see, though, it seems to be a mixture of a technocracy and a magocracy. For those of you who aren't aware, a magocracy is, in fantasy or sci-fi, it's ruled by people with special powers. Probably the most notable example would be something like the Sith empires, where the Sith had force powers and they ruled. Technocracy in this case meaning ruled by scientists, kind of like the Empire of Eggman and Sonic the Hedgehog. But yeah, so it seems to be a combination of the two, but this is magic technology, so they seem to do both. It's pretty common in this world that the two are very tightly intertwined, because like the blood of ultimate fortune, for instance, is scientific because luck is seen as genetic, and they replace blood with higher luck, so that's kind of scientific. But once again, fortune and luck is kind of this metaphysical thing, and we have the fate alteration machine, which is a very technological solution affecting this very metaphysical force. So my guess is the government of the empire probably has something like a hierarchy with Dornkirk at the top, and then under it you have kind of the sorcerer technoman. I guess you'd call them technomancers. And then the army seems quite powerful. So beyond that, you have like, I think it's the 6 generals or whatever. And then you kind of have the rest of the military hierarchy. It seems like pretty much everything by this point in time is focused towards the military and the conquest. Perhaps that's because they don't really have designs on long-term survival on this at this point. Because once they succeed in conquering the world, there's just not really, and they activate the machine, there's not really a need to plan beyond that because things will fundamentally change. So ultimately, did the Zaibach Empire succeed? Did it fail? What can be said of its legacy? We don't really know, and because there probably won't be a sequel to Visions of Escaflowne, for both bad and good, I might add, because they might screw it up, its fate will forever remain a mystery. I like to think that it'll just spend a couple quiet centuries rebuilding and perhaps become more of a traditional state, not led by kind of a millenarian impulse. But who knows? So that is today's episode of Sci-Fi Pulsi. I hope you enjoyed it, and more to come.